"Let him go, Emily, or the river will take you with him." The warning tore through the storm, but Emily Carter did not loosen her grip. Her knees were buried in snow at the edge of Black Hollow River, her dress frozen stiff against her legs, her pale hands locked around a rope that had already burned raw lines across her palms. Behind her, Frostvale Pack stood in a half-circle of torches and fear, watching the black water slam against broken sheets of ice. In front of her, 12 giant wolves had been thrown into the freezing current like shadows swallowed by winter. 11 were already on the bank, trembling beneath borrowed blankets, their massive bodies rising and falling with shallow breaths. The 12th was still in the river. He was the largest of them all, a black wolf with silver eyes, caught beyond a jagged shelf of ice nearly 30 feet from shore. He did not thrash. He did not whimper. He only stared at Emily through the blowing snow, calm in a way that made her chest ache. It was not the look of an animal waiting to be saved. It was the look of someone who had already accepted that no one would come. "Emily," Ryan Hale shouted from behind her, his voice sharp with disbelief, "you have done enough. Those are not our wolves." She heard the words, but they sounded far away beneath the roar of the river. Enough. That was what people always said when kindness became inconvenient. Enough when she gave her supper to an old widow. Enough when she stayed up all night warming medicine for sick children. Enough when she stepped forward in a pack that preferred her small, silent, and obedient. But there was a living soul in that water, and Emily had never known how to turn away from suffering just because someone stronger told her to. The rope around her waist dragged tight as another wave struck the ice. Her breath came in thin white bursts. Her fingers were so cold they no longer felt like fingers, only stubborn pieces of bone refusing to open. Somewhere behind her, Alpha Marcus Vane cursed under his breath, and the warriors shifted uneasily. None of them had entered the water. Not one. They had stood there with their broad shoulders, fine coats, and polished boots, calling it strategy, calling it caution, calling it law. Emily had called it what it was, then tied the rope herself. The first wolf had nearly pulled her under. The second had been so heavy she thought her spine would snap. By the 5th, her lungs felt full of ice. By the 9th, the crowd had gone silent. By the 11th, even those who hated her had stopped laughing. Now only the last wolf remained, and the river was changing. The ice shelf beneath him cracked with a sound like thunder rolling under the earth. Emily felt the whole bank shudder. The black wolf's silver eyes met hers again, and for one strange, breathless second, the storm seemed to pause around them. She saw intelligence there. Pride. Pain. And something deeper, something that pulled at the quiet center of her soul like moonlight touching dark water. "Cut the rope," Marcus ordered. The words hit colder than the river. Emily turned her head just enough to see Ryan step forward, his knife catching the orange light of the torches. The pack gasped, but no one stopped him. Of course they did not. She was only an Omega. A girl with no rank worth defending. A girl who had been told her whole life that softness was weakness. But as Ryan lowered the blade toward the rope, something inside Emily rose hotter than fear. She looked back at the wolf trapped in the black water, and her voice came out steady, quiet, and impossible to ignore. "No. I started with 12. I finish with 12. Hours before the storm brought the pack to Black Hollow River, Emily Carter had been invisible in the place that was supposed to be her home. Dawn came pale over Frostvale, turning the windows of the longhouse silver while snow gathered in soft drifts against the doors. The warriors were already awake, laughing over hot coffee and thick slices of toast before they left for patrol, their voices loud enough to fill every corner. Emily moved between them with a basket of clean bandages on one arm and a stack of folded coats on the other, careful not to brush anyone with her shoulder, careful not to step into conversations she had never been invited to join. She was 22, old enough to have a place, old enough to have a voice, but in Frostvale, rank spoke louder than age. Alphas trained. Betas commanded. Omegas served, smiled, and disappeared. Emily had learned the shape of that silence so well that sometimes she forgot what her own laughter sounded like. Her pale hands were chapped from cold water and winter soap, her boots were patched at the heel, and her grey wool dress had been mended so many times the seams looked like thin white scars. Yet she kept moving. She warmed medicine over the kitchen stove. She carried firewood to the nursery. She checked on Mrs. Whittaker, the old widow near the north fence, and left half of her breakfast wrapped in cloth beside the woman's door. It was not bravery, Emily told herself. It was simply what needed doing when no one else thought to look. By mid-morning, Ryan Hale found her in the storage shed counting jars of dried herbs. He leaned against the doorway in his polished patrol jacket, snow melting on his dark hair, his smile bright in a way that never reached his eyes. "Still playing healer, Emily?" he asked. "These supplies are for the southern cabins," she said without looking up. "The children there have coughs." Ryan gave a small laugh. "You worry about coughs while real wolves worry about boarders. That is why no one takes you seriously." The words landed where old words always landed, in the quiet place beneath her ribs. Emily tightened the lid on a jar of peppermint leaves and set it into the crate. Someone has to worry about the people who are not strong enough to shout. For a moment, Ryan's smile thinned. He did not like it when she answered. Few people in Frostvale did. Softness was acceptable only when it bowed. Kindness was praised only when it stayed useful. By noon, Alpha Marcus Vane gathered the senior warriors in the meeting hall and shut the doors before Emily could pass with fresh towels. Through the wood, she heard only fragments: Northern Border, Royal Road, Trouble Before Nightfall. Then the room went silent all at once, the kind of silence that meant a secret had entered and every powerful man inside had chosen to keep it. When the door opened, Marcus stepped out first, broad-shouldered and calm, his face carved into the expression he used before ceremonies and lies. His eyes passed over Emily as if she were part of the wall. "No one leaves camp after sunset," he announced to the hall. "There may be strangers moving through the woods." A few younger wolves murmured in excitement, but Emily felt something colder than fear move through her. Strangers were not usually spoken of with locked doors and lowered voices. Strangers did not make an alpha hide his hands behind his back so no one could see them tremble. That evening, while Frostvale prepared for another frozen night, Emily carried a crate of medicine toward the old storehouse near the river trail. Snow fell harder, blurring the lanterns into soft yellow ghosts. She had almost reached the door when the first howl rose from the forest. It was distant, broken by wind, and unlike any sound she had ever heard. The crate slipped in her hands. A second howl followed, then another, layered with fear and urgency. Emily turned toward the black line of trees. Behind her, warm light glowed from the pack houses, safe and golden. Ahead, the woods opened into darkness. She thought of Ryan's words. She thought of Marcus's locked door. Then she set the crate down carefully in the snow and ran toward the river. The trail to Black Hollow River vanished beneath fresh snow, but Emily knew every bend by memory. She had walked it in spring to gather wild mint, in summer to check the fishing nets, and in fall to leave food for the foxes that nested near the old cedar roots. Tonight it felt like a different world. The trees leaned close under the weight of ice, their branches creaking above her like doors opening in an empty house. Wind pushed at her shoulders, sharp enough to steal the breath from her lungs, but the howls kept coming, each one weaker than the last. Emily ran harder. Her boots slipped twice on hidden stones. Her skirt caught on a thorn bush and tore at the hem. She did not stop. By the time she reached the ridge above the river, her chest was burning and snow had gathered in her hair like white ash. Then she saw the water. Black Hollow was not supposed to move like that in winter. Most years, it froze into a silver road strong enough for children to skate across by Christmas. But this storm had broken it open. The river churned dark and violent between shelves of ice, carrying splintered branches, chunks of snow, and flashes of something far larger. Emily stepped closer, and her heart dropped. Wolves. Not the lean gray wolves that sometimes crossed the Frostvale border. These were giants, each one nearly the size of a draft horse, their coats heavy with freezing water, their bodies caught among cracked ice and fallen timber. 12 of them. Some clung to the broken edge with their front paws. Some struggled to keep their heads above the current. One had been pushed against a half-submerged log, too exhausted to move. Their eyes shone through the snowstorm, gold, amber, blue, and in the farthest place where the river bent toward the gorge, silver. Emily lifted both hands to her mouth. "Hold on," she whispered, though the wind swallowed the words. She looked back toward Frostvale. The pack houses were hidden beyond the trees, but their lantern glow still colored the low clouds. She could run for help. She should run for help. But even as the thought formed, one of the wolves slipped lower into the water, and a sound came from it that was not wild or frightening. It was tired. It was young. It was afraid. Emily moved before fear could argue. She slid down the snowy bank, grabbing branches to keep from falling, and reached the emergency post near the old ferry crossing. The rope was still there, stiff with frost, coiled beside a rusted iron hook. Her fingers shook as she pulled it free. It was heavy, rough, and far too short to reach the farthest wolf, but long enough for the first. She tied one end around the cedar trunk, then looped the other around her waist the way she had seen river workers do when spring floods came down from the mountains. The knot looked clumsy. She tightened it anyway. Behind her, voices rose through the trees. Marcus had sent the patrol after her, or perhaps the howls had drawn them too. Torches appeared along the ridge, bright orange against the blue night. Ryan was first to shout her name. "Emily Carter, step away from that water." She turned, snow whipping across her face. Ryan, Marcus, and nearly a dozen warriors stood above her in their fur-lined coats, staring past her at the trapped wolves. For one breath, Emily thought relief would move them. Surely now that they had seen, they would act. Surely strength meant something more than standing warm on a bank while others froze. But Marcus did not reach for the rope. He did not order the warriors forward. His eyes narrowed, and something like recognition passed over his face before he buried it beneath command. "Those wolves are not Frostvale," he said. "No one touches them." Emily stared at him, unable to understand how words could be so calm when lives were slipping away 20 feet in front of him. "They are in the river," she said. "They need help." "They are strangers," Ryan answered. "They could be dangerous." Emily looked from his polished boots to the shaking wolf nearest the ice shelf. The creature could barely lift its head. Dangerous was not the word her heart gave her. Forgotten was. Abandoned was. She turned back to the water and stepped onto the first shelf of ice. It dipped beneath her weight with a crack that sent gasps through the warriors behind her. Cold rushed over her boots. Her body screamed for her to retreat. Instead, Emily fixed her eyes on the nearest wolf and lowered her voice until it was softer than the storm. "I am coming." The first step into the river stole every thought from Emily except cold. It rushed through her boots, climbed her legs, and closed around her body with a shock so sharp she almost forgot how to breathe. The ice shelf dipped beneath her, groaning under her weight, and the rope around her waist snapped tight as the current tried to pull her sideways. Behind her, the warriors shouted all at once, their voices tangled with the storm, but none of them came down. Emily kept her eyes on the nearest wolf. It was smaller than the others, though still enormous beside her, with pale gray fur plastered flat against its body and one paw hooked over the broken ice. Its golden eyes followed her with frightened intelligence. "Easy," Emily whispered, though her teeth were already chattering. "I will not hurt you." The wolf made a weak sound, not a growl, not a warning, but a question. Emily reached the edge of the ice shelf and dropped to her knees, plunging both arms into the water. The cold bit through her sleeves instantly. For one terrible second, she could not find the wolf beneath the surface. Then her fingers closed around thick wet fur. "Pull," she shouted over her shoulder. No one moved. She twisted back and saw the line of warriors standing frozen on the bank, uncertain, ashamed, or simply unwilling. Ryan had his arms crossed. Marcus watched in silence, his face unreadable beneath the torchlight. Something inside Emily tightened. She stopped waiting for them. Bracing one foot against a jagged ridge of ice, she leaned back with everything she had. The wolf was impossibly heavy. The current held it like a fist. Her shoulders burned. Her palms slipped. The rope cut into her waist. She thought of the nursery children coughing through the night, of Mrs. Whittaker pretending she was not hungry, of every quiet creature in Frostvale that had survived only because someone decided they were worth the trouble. "Come on," she breathed. "Please." The wolf seemed to understand. With a final effort, it pushed one paw onto the ice, then another. Emily grabbed the thick fur at its shoulder and pulled until both of them slid backward across the shelf. The wolf collapsed onto the snowy bank in a heap of shivering breath. A murmur passed through the pack. No cheers. No praise. Only surprise, as if they had watched a candle refuse to go out in a blizzard. Emily did not wait for permission. She crawled to the wolf's side, pressed one trembling hand to its neck, and felt a pulse. Weak, but steady. Relief hit her so hard her eyes stung. Then another howl broke from the river, and she turned. The second wolf was trapped farther out, dark brown with a white blaze across its chest, one front leg hooked around a drifting branch. The branch was moving toward the faster water near the bend. "Emily, stop," Ryan called. "You got one. That is enough. Enough." The word almost made her laugh, but she had no breath left for it. She pushed herself upright, her soaked dress dragging heavily at her knees. Snow stuck to her eyelashes. Her hands shook so badly she had to look down to make sure they still held the rope. On the bank, the rescued wolf lifted its head and looked at her. Something passed through its golden eyes, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. As if it knew she was smaller than the storm and going back anyway. Emily stepped onto the ice again. The shelf cracked beneath her heel, and every warrior on the bank sucked in a breath. She moved faster this time, because the river was faster too. The second wolf slipped once, vanished up to its ears, then fought back to the surface. Emily threw herself flat on the ice, reaching as far as she could. Her fingers caught the edge of the branch first. It spun, slick and frozen, nearly dragging her forward. The rope jerked her back, hard enough to steal the air from her chest. She clung to it, then reached again and caught the wolf's wet ruff. "Hold still," she whispered, though the command was impossible. "Trust me for 10 more seconds." 10 seconds became 20. 20 became a lifetime measured in breath, ice, and the pounding of her own heart. At last, the wolf found the shelf with its back paws, and Emily pulled until they both slid toward shore. This time, one of the younger warriors stepped forward as if instinct had moved him before pride could stop him. Marcus lifted one hand, and the warrior froze. Emily saw it. Everyone saw it. Still, she hauled the second wolf onto the bank alone. It rolled to its side, breathing clouds into the night air. The first wolf dragged itself closer to the second, pressing its damp shoulder against its companion as if sharing what little warmth remained. Emily looked from them to the river. 10 more. The thought should have broken her. Instead, it made the world simple. One life at a time. One breath at a time. One impossible mercy after another. She tightened the rope around her waist, wiped snow from her eyes with the back of her wrist, and turned toward the third wolf. The third wolf nearly slipped beneath the ice before Emily reached it. She had to crawl on her stomach across a trembling shelf, the river breathing cold mist against her face, while the rope pulled hard at. Her waist and the storm pressed snow into her eyes. This one had fur the color of smoke and ears pinned flat with exhaustion. When Emily touched its shoulder, the wolf flinched, then stilled as if some fragile understanding passed between them. "I know," she whispered. "I am scared too." She pulled until her arms shook, until the world narrowed to the rough rope, the frozen water, and the single stubborn command inside her chest. Live. By the time the third wolf reached the bank, Emily could no longer feel her feet. By the fourth, her sleeves had frozen into stiff cuffs around her wrists. By the fifth, the current caught the wolf and swung it sideways so suddenly that Emily was dragged to one knee, her breath knocked from her in a white burst. A few warriors shouted. One even moved toward the river again, but Marcus Vane stepped into his path without a word. That silence told Emily more than any confession could have. He did not want these wolves saved. He was not afraid of danger. He was afraid of who they might be. The fifth wolf looked almost silver under the moon, its body heavy with water, its eyes locked on Emily as she braced both heels against the ice and leaned back. Inch by inch, it came closer. The moment it reached the shore, the first two wolves lifted their heads, weak but alert, and a low sound moved through them, not threatening, not wild, almost like a prayer carried in another language. Emily did not understand it, but she felt it settle beneath her ribs. The sixth wolf was caught between two broken slabs of ice. The seventh had drifted near the old ferry post. The eighth was so large that Emily thought she would fail before she even touched it. Its dark red coat clung to its frame, and when she looped the rope beneath its front legs, it rested its massive head against her shoulder for one brief second, trusting her with a weight no one else had been willing to carry. That almost broke her. Not the cold. Not the fear. The trust. "I have you," she breathed, though her voice had become thin and rough. Behind her, Ryan muttered something about foolishness, but the words had lost their power. The pack was watching differently now. The younger wolves no longer laughed. The older ones looked at the ground. Some of the women had begun pulling blankets from their own shoulders and laying them over the rescued wolves. Small mercies, late but real. Emily saw them and felt a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with fire. By the ninth rescue, her hands were clumsy and pale against the rope. She had to wrap it around her forearm because her fingers would not close properly. By the 10th, the ice shelf split behind her, and the river swallowed the place where she had been standing seconds before. Gasps rose from the bank like birds startled from trees. Emily froze, heart pounding, then forced herself onward. The 10th wolf was old, its muzzle touched with white, its eyes calm despite the storm. When she guided it to safety, it pressed its forehead lightly against her arm before collapsing into the snow. The gesture was gentle, dignified, and unbearably human. The 11th wolf waited near the bend, half hidden by blowing snow. It was smaller than the others, with a cream-colored coat and trembling legs that barely held to the ice. Emily was moving slowly now, each step a bargain with pain, each breath scraping in her throat. The rope felt heavier than chain. The river sounded louder, angrier, as if it knew she was taking back what it had claimed. "Come back," someone called from the bank, and for the first time, it was not Ryan. It was Mrs. Whittaker, wrapped in a shawl, her old voice breaking through the storm. "Emily, please." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. She wanted to obey. She wanted warmth, dry clothes, a chair beside the kitchen stove. She wanted someone else to be brave. Then the 11th wolf slipped, and wanting became useless. She threw herself forward, caught its wet fur with both arms, and pulled with everything left in her. The world blurred white and black. The shore moved closer by inches. When the 11th wolf finally slid onto the bank, Emily fell beside it, too tired to rise. For a moment, there was only the sound of the storm and 12 breaths in the night, 11 safe, 1 still trapped. Then, from the far bend of the river, the black wolf with silver eyes lifted his head. Emily tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and failed beneath her. Snow pressed cold against her cheek. Around her, the 11 rescued wolves lay in a broken crescent along the bank, covered in coats and blankets that steamed faintly in the freezing air. Their eyes were open now, fixed not on the warriors, not on Marcus Vane, but on the black wolf still trapped beyond the bend. The largest one. The silent one. The one whose silver gaze had never left Emily. She forced one hand into the snow and rose to her knees. Pain moved through her slowly, not sharp, not sudden, but deep and heavy, as if winter itself had climbed inside her bones. "No more," Mrs. Whittaker pleaded from behind the line of torches. "Child, you will not make it back." Emily wanted to tell her she knew. She wanted to say that every step into that river had taken something from her, warmth, strength, certainty, breath. But the black wolf lowered his head as the ice beneath him shifted, and the answer became simple again. If she stopped now, the river would win by inches. Marcus stepped forward before she could reach the rope. His voice carried across the bank, calm enough to frighten her more than anger would have. "This ends here. The Omega is finished." Emily looked up at him through wet lashes. "He is still out there. And he is not worth losing one of our own," Marcus said. The word sounded noble. The fear behind them did not. Emily saw the way his eyes avoided the wolf's face. She saw the tension in his jaw, the pale line of his mouth, the hand he kept closed around the silver ring on his finger. A ring she had seen before on old royal notices nailed to the meeting hall wall, a mark used by border packs sworn to the crown. Marcus had hidden his beneath gloves for years. Tonight, in the torchlight, it gleamed like a secret tired of being buried. Ryan moved beside him, knife still in hand, not raised toward anyone, only angled toward the rope with a purpose that turned Emily's stomach hollow. The younger warriors shifted uneasily. "Alpha," one of them said, voice uncertain, "the others are watching us." Marcus did not turn. "Then let them learn that Frostvale does not risk itself for strangers." A low rumble rose from the 11 wolves on the bank. It was weak, but it traveled through the snow with quiet force. Not a threat. A protest. Emily felt it in her chest before she heard it with her ears. The black wolf lifted his head higher, and though the storm blurred the distance, his silver eyes sharpened with something unmistakable. Command. Not loud. Not desperate. Command that needed no voice. For one breath, every torch flame bent toward the river. Emily's fingers closed around the rope again. Her skin was too numb to feel its roughness, but she remembered the shape of it. She remembered how to tie the knot. She remembered that courage did not always arrive as fire. Sometimes it came as a tired girl standing up when her body begged her not to. "He is not a stranger to himself," she said softly. "And I will not let you decide his worth from the shore." Ryan gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You can barely stand." Emily looked at him, and something in her quiet made his smile fade. "Then I will crawl." She wrapped the rope twice around her waist, but before she could step forward, warmth flickered beneath her palm. She looked down. A pale silver glow pulsed under her skin, faint as moonlight beneath ice. It moved from her wrist to her fingers, then along the rope, melting the frost where it touched. Gasps broke behind her. Emily stared, stunned, as heat spread through her hands, gentle but steady, not burning, not frightening, only alive. The 11 wolves lowered their heads as if recognizing something ancient. Marcus went still. The ring on his finger flashed once and dimmed. Across the river, the black wolf's eyes widened, and for the first time, Emily saw the calm break. He knew what this was. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. The ice beneath him cracked again. The sound rolled across Black Hollow like a final warning. Emily stepped onto the river, the silver light trembling around her hands, and whispered into the storm, "Hold on. I am coming for you now." The river did not welcome Emily back. It struck her legs with a force that made the world tilt, and for one dizzy second the torches on the bank became floating stars above a black sky. The rope caught her before the current could take her fully, snapping tight around her waist, but this time the pain came softer, dulled beneath the strange silver warmth spreading from her hands. The glow moved along the wet rope in thin threads, bright enough to turn falling snow into sparks of pale light. Behind her, Frostvale had gone silent. Even the warriors who had mocked her now stared as if the Omega they had ignored all winter had stepped out of an old story. Emily did not look back. The black wolf was farther than she had thought, trapped where the river narrowed and rushed between two walls of ice. His front paws rested on a cracked shelf, but the shelf was breaking apart piece by piece. Each time the water slammed against it, his massive body sank lower. Still, his silver eyes stayed on her, steady, commanding, almost sorrowful. "Stay with me," she whispered, though the wind tore the words away. She took another step, then another, using the rope as her only anchor. On the bank, Marcus Vane's calm finally broke. "Ryan," he said, and that single word carried more truth than any confession. Ryan moved at once. The knife in his hand was small, ordinary, a tool used for rope and kindling, but the way he walked toward the cedar trunk made Mrs. Whitaker cry out. A younger warrior caught his arm. "What are you doing?" Ryan shoved him back with his shoulder, not hard enough to harm him, only enough to prove where his loyalty stood. "Following my alpha." Emily heard the words and felt them settle cold beneath the silver warmth. She turned just enough to see Marcus watching the black wolf instead of her. His face was pale now, stripped of ceremony and pride. Recognition was no longer hidden in his eyes. It was naked fear. He knew. He had known from the first moment. "You know who he is," Emily called. The whole bank seemed to stop breathing. Marcus looked at her then, and for once, he truly saw her, not as a servant moving through halls, not as a quiet girl carrying medicine, but as someone standing between him and the secret he needed buried. "You should have stayed invisible," he said. The words were soft, but they reached everyone. 11 rescued. Wolves lifted their heads. One by one, despite exhaustion, they shifted their gaze from the river to Marcus. Around their necks, beneath wet fur and frost, Emily saw silver cords braided with small black stones, royal field markers worn only by the king's personal guard. The young warrior who had tried to stop Ryan stepped back in shock. "Those are crown wolves," he breathed. The sentence moved through Frostvale like fire through dry grass. Crown wolves. Royal guard. Not strangers. Not enemies. Not nameless bodies in the storm. Emily looked toward the black wolf, and understanding struck so deeply that her knees almost gave beneath the current. If the 11 were guards, then the last wolf was not merely important. He was the center they had formed around. The one they had tried to protect. Ryan reached the cedar trunk. Mrs. Whitaker shouted again. The younger warriors surged forward, uncertain but awake at last. Marcus lifted his hand to command them back, but nobody moved. His power was cracking, not with force, but with truth. Ryan bent toward the rope. Emily felt the line tremble around her waist. The black wolf saw it too. A low sound rolled from his chest, weakened by cold, but carrying across the river with such authority that every wolf on the bank lowered their eyes. Ryan froze. The knife slipped from his hand into the snow. Marcus staggered one step back as if the sound had named him guilty. Emily did not understand the ancient language of kings, but her soul understood the command inside it. Enough. The ice beneath the black wolf split wide. Water surged over his shoulders. Emily stopped thinking, stopped fearing, stopped being the girl they had trained to apologize for taking up space. She wrapped the glowing rope around both hands, stepped into the deepest part of the current, and reached for him as the river rose between them. The deepest part of Black Hollow River rose past Emily's waist and stole the last warmth from her body, but the silver light in her hands would not die. It spread across the rope like moonlit thread, then moved over the surface of the water in trembling ripples, soft and impossible against the dark current. The storm howled around her, yet beneath it she heard something quieter, the uneven breath of the black wolf, the strained creak of the ice, the frightened silence of the pack behind her. She had never been strong in the way Frostvale respected. She could not command a room with one look. She could not make warriors lower their heads. She could not shift into some towering creature that made the forest tremble. All she had was a heart that refused to count a life as lost while it was still breathing. The black wolf slipped lower, his silver eyes narrowing as the river pulled at him. Emily reached for him, but the distance between them widened with every surge of water. "No," she whispered, and the word came out more like a vow than a plea. She looped the glowing rope around her forearm, planted both feet against the hidden stones beneath the current, and leaned forward until the river climbed to her ribs. Behind her, someone shouted her name. Another voice ordered the warriors to hold the line. This time, they obeyed the right command. The rope tightened from the bank as hands seized it, one pair, then two, then many. Mrs. Whitaker, the young warrior, even women from the cabins, all pulling together while Marcus stood apart in the torchlight, his authority falling from him like snow sliding off a roof. Emily felt the change through the rope. She was no longer alone. The knowledge nearly made her cry, but there was no space for tears. There was only the wolf. She lunged the final few feet and caught the thick fur at his neck. The moment her hand touched him, the silver light flared so brightly that the river around them turned pale, as if dawn had opened beneath the ice. The black wolf went still. Not weak. Not defeated. Still in recognition. A warmth answered from him, deep and ancient, meeting the glow in Emily's palms like two halves of a forgotten song. She felt power there, vast and restrained, not cruel, not wild, but wounded by long duty and colder than any winter night. She saw, for one heartbeat, flashes that did not belong to her, a royal road buried in snow, loyal guards forming a circle, betrayal hidden behind a friendly border gate, and a king who had chosen to protect his people even when the trap closed around him. Emily gasped, but she did not let go. "I have you," she said, voice breaking. "Come back with me." The wolf's eyes softened. Then he pushed with what strength he had left. The warriors on the bank pulled. Emily pulled too, every muscle trembling, silver light streaming from her hands into the water, melting the ice around his trapped legs without burning, freeing without harming. Inch by inch, the black wolf moved toward shore. The river fought for him. The storm bent low. The rope strained until Emily thought it might fail, but then the 11 crown wolves lifted their heads and released a low, steady sound that rolled across the bank like a promise. The young warrior shouted, "Pull together." Frostvale obeyed. With one final surge, Emily and the black wolf slid onto the snowy bank together. She collapsed beside him, shaking so hard she could barely lift her head. The world blurred around the edges, torches, faces, snow, silver light fading from her hands. Then the black wolf pressed his forehead gently against her palm. Warmth bloomed beneath her skin again, softer this time, almost tender. The frost along his dark fur began to melt. His shape shimmered beneath the moonlight, growing brighter, less wolf and more something ancient wearing shadow as a cloak. The pack stumbled back. Marcus fell silent. Emily could only stare as the great black wolf opened his silver eyes, and the air itself seemed to bow before him. Light rolled over the black wolf like moonlight crossing deep water, and where paws had pressed into the snow, hands slowly appeared. Where soaked fur had clung to a massive frame, a man knelt beneath the storm, tall, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in the last shadows of the shift. The air changed around him. Every wolf on the riverbank felt it at once, not as fear alone, but as ancient authority settling over Frostvale like a crown made of winter stars. Caleb Blackwood lifted his head. His hair was dark with melted snow, his skin pale beneath the cold, his silver eyes brighter than the river behind him. For one long second, no one moved. Then the 11 rescued wolves lowered themselves before him, exhausted but loyal, their royal markers glinting against the snow. The young warrior who had spoken first dropped to one knee. Mrs. Whittaker covered her mouth with both hands. Ryan stepped back as if the ground beneath him had become uncertain. Marcus Vane stood alone beside the torches, his face empty of every lie he had carried into that night. Caleb's gaze moved across the bank, taking in the rope, the knife fallen harmlessly in the snow, the crown wolves wrapped in village blankets, and finally Emily Carter, kneeling beside him with frozen sleeves, trembling hands, and eyes too tired to hide her shock. She tried to bow because everyone else was bowing, because habit had trained her body faster than truth could reach her mind. Caleb caught her wrist before her head could lower. His touch was warm now, impossibly warm after the river, and gentle enough that she forgot the entire pack was watching. "Do not kneel to me," he said, his voice low, roughened by cold, yet carrying to every corner of the bank. "Not tonight." Emily stared at him. "You are the Alpha King." A faint sadness crossed his face, not weakness, but the sorrow of a man who understood what his title had hidden from her until this moment. "And you are the only one here who saved me before knowing that." The word struck the crowd harder than any command. Shame moved through Frostvale in lowered eyes and silent faces. Caleb turned then, and the softness vanished from his expression. He looked at Marcus. "You recognized my guard." Marcus opened his mouth, but no answer came. Caleb's silver gaze dropped to the ring on Marcus's hand. "You recognized me." The silence that followed was colder than the storm. Marcus did not deny it. He could not. The young warriors around him stepped away, not with cruelty, but with the quiet clarity of people finally seeing the shape of the truth. Caleb raised one hand, and 2 crown wolves shifted just enough to stand beside Marcus in human form, steady and formal, waiting for royal judgment without chaos, without rage. "You will answer before the council," Caleb said. "Not in darkness. Not behind a locked door. Before the people you tried to deceive." Marcus lowered his eyes. For the first time since Emily had known him, he looked small. But Caleb did not stay with him. He turned back to Emily, and the storm seemed to soften around them. Her body was still shaking, though she tried to hide it. Caleb removed the heavy royal cloak from the shoulders of one guard and wrapped it around her himself. The fabric swallowed her in warmth, black wool lined with silver thread, smelling faintly of pine, snow, and distant fire. "You saved 12 lives tonight," he said. 11 of my guard, and 1 king who had almost forgotten what mercy looked like from the ground." Emily's throat tightened. "I only did what anyone should have done." Caleb looked past her at the silent pack, then back into her eyes. "That is why it mattered." Beneath his hand, the silver glow returned to her wrist. This time it did not flare in panic. It bloomed, calm and bright, forming a crescent mark that matched the light rising beneath Caleb's own skin. A sound moved through the crown wolves, reverent and stunned. Emily looked down, barely breathing. She had heard stories of fate bonds whispered by old women near winter fires, stories of the moon choosing 2 souls not for rank, not for power, but for the truth they carried when no one was watching. She had never imagined such a thing would find her at the edge of a frozen river, soaked, shaking, and wrapped in a king's cloak. Caleb saw the fear in her face and released her wrist at once, giving her the choice no one in Frostvale had ever bothered to offer. "No bond will command you," he said quietly. "No crown will claim what your heart does not freely give." Emily looked at the 11 wolves she had pulled from the water, at Mrs. Whittaker crying softly into her shawl, at the warriors who could no longer meet her eyes, and finally at the river that had tried to take the last life from her hands. Then she looked at Caleb Blackwood, the king she had saved as a stranger, and found not a monster, not a legend, but a man watching her as if her gentleness had become the strongest thing in the world. The first pale light of dawn broke over Black Hollow, turning the snow gold. Emily drew the cloak tighter around her shoulders and stood beside him, not behind him. And when Caleb faced Frostvale again, his voice carried over the river, the trees, and every soul who had once mistaken silence for weakness. Remember this night. The smallest wolf among you walked into the cold when the strongest stayed ashore. From this dawn forward, Emily Carter is under my protection, not because fate marked her, but because her own courage already did.